You're listening to Wycombe Sound, an election special programme with myself, Bob Johnson, interviewing the candidates who are standing in the Wycombe constituency in the general election on the 12th of December. We've already heard tonight from the independent candidate Ed Gemmell. It's time now to hear from the Wycombe Independence candidate Julia Wassell.
Well, thank you very much, Bob, for inviting me in. I'm very pleased when the minority parties have a voice. Yes, I was born in Beaconsfield. I grew up in Hazelmere near the crossroads, and then moved to Tyler's Green, my parents, and I've lived in High Wycombe for the rest of my life, my adult life, living opposite the Rye, so I feel very privileged in that place to live. I went to Wycombe High School, and then I had a gap in my education. I worked at Wycombe Post Office as a postwoman, and I was organising secretary of the Union of Post Office Workers, doing welfare work mainly, and that put it in my mind to train as a social worker, which I did at Buckinghamshire College, and I was a mental health social worker from then until the present day.
And I can sort of see where your politics probably started, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. So when did you get interested in politics, and when did you start actively taking part?
Well, I had a rather typical sort of middle-class upbringing, but when I was aged about 14, a friend of mine confided in me that her grandparents had died during the Second World War in the concentration camps under Nazi Germany, and it gave me a terrific shock to hear this, and I looked into it more, I read about it, and from that day on really it politicised me, and at 16 I went to join the Labour Party at Townfield House, High Wycombe, but was told I was too young. So I have a great mission in life really to stand up for minorities and people who have no voice, because I believe the saying that if you don't speak out, there'll be nobody left to speak out for you. So that was the kind of stimulus. I campaigned quite a lot in the women's movement in the late 70s for women's rights. I'm a fervent believer in women's rights and other people's rights. Because of my career in mental health, I didn't really get involved in local politics fully, I would say, until I won my council seat in 1997. And then I've been full on at it ever since as a district and county councillor. Prior to that, I was more interested in single issue campaigning. I'm an anti-nuclear protester. I was at all the anti-nuclear protests around Wycombe at Dawes Hill, Knapp Hill, Greenham Common and so on in the 1980s. And to this day I strongly believe that we shouldn't be funding weapons of mass destruction pointed at innocent women and children and civilians throughout the world. And this new generation of Trident has multiple warheads that can point at numerous countries at the same time. So I'm horrified by the worldwide investment in nuclear weapons and believe that money could be so much better spent.
You've done very well as an independent candidate. It's quite hard to stand in elections, and particularly I think local elections, and actually do well as an independent, but actually you've managed to do that as part of the what was East Wycombe Independence and now the Wycombe Independence.
Yes, I think people quite like the independent voice because it brings people together across different ideologies, across different beliefs. So everybody feels they can have some kind of home with an independent candidate, I think. I mean, it would be true to say that myself, I'm independent and left-leaning, although I'm tough on crime and want to support the victims of crime. But our independent party, which some people find hard to understand how you can have an independent party, but it basically means we're a party of conscience. We don't have to be whipped in a particular direction. I mean, I would be horrified if any of my colleagues were being pressured or whipped to vote in a particular way, and one can always abstain. So within my party, I am an independent of the left. Other people have different views. And this was brought starkly into perspective for us by the fact that the Brexit debate, of course, has views right across the spectrum and many different types of views within that. So it was very difficult for our party to develop a policy on that. But this election is called the Brexit election. So therefore we had to work together, knowing we had people who'd voted Leave and Remain, to come up with a compromise situation.
What do you think are the most important issues in Wycombe at the moment?
Well, I think probably people know me best for being someone who wants to clean up High Wycombe and have a much more vibrant and imaginative, creative town centre. I have a great love for Wycombe. My parents came here during the war. My mother was an evacuee who was evacuated from central London to West Wycombe in the Chorley Road, and my father was posted in Plumer Road and was a trainee officer at Sandhurst. He used to cycle every day. So Wycombe gave my parents a home, so that's where my great affection comes for it. But like everybody else, we can see the faults and the potential. And I think a lot of people who vote for me will vote for me on that. If they don't get anything else out of their MP, they know that I will buy a massive broom and sweep up all the fly tipping, everything graffiti, and then try and have a really good plan to work with local councils to put into practice some of the very good ideas that are floating about at the moment.
You mentioned fly tipping, which is clearly a problem at the moment, particularly ever since the council introduced charges at the recycling centres. How did you feel about them introducing the charges?
I think there's very little connection between fly tipping and the charges, frankly. Some people might think, oh, well, they brought in charges, so I'll do a bit of extra fly tipping. But most of the things we find, like mattresses and so on, wouldn't incur a charge anyway. So the main impact, I think, is on private land, where the council haven't released figures. But I think it's very regrettable to have charges when people have already paid their council tax. I mean, this is one of my standpoints, that people are regularly paying their income tax and their council tax, and they're getting less back. And that seems to me very unfair, that things should at least stay with the status quo or improve. But because of inflation and austerity, things have slipped right back. And I've just watched since 2010 as council services have been cut and cut and cut, starting with public footpaths not being cleared, and then hitting children's services, hitting services for vulnerable people, and I'm absolutely horrified by it.
You also mentioned taking a broom to High Wycombe, which I quite like. Well, how do you feel about what's happening in the High Street at the moment, particularly with the number of shops that are empty?
Well, I walked down the High Street yesterday and I was delighted to see the Christmas pudding covers on the concrete balls. That amused me, and I immediately posted a complaint that there wasn't any brandy on top of them. And, it was picked up by quite a few people who hadn't seen it yet. I mean, that kind of thing would attract people into town.
Yeah, yes.
But as you say, as I walked past the Christmas puddings, I saw an empty shop that I hadn't noticed before. And I think there's lots of incentives can be offered to split up shops and offer indoor market type opportunities. But the reality is that, we're all shopping online. I mean, I have delivery of books from Amazon. I can't get everything in the very good bookshop in Eden. And I think we're all kind of culpable for the, decline of the high street. But we need a vision about what a high street can be. What will bring people in beside banks and estate agents? There must be things that people would come in for. And I think all these studies of high streets are showing that people are thinking about their tummies and they're coming in for food. So I propose that our market was regenerated by advertising it as an international market, an international food market. That's had a lukewarm reception, but I would continue pushing for a themed market because the poor market traders themselves are not getting enough footfall.
You mentioned Brexit earlier on. Where do you personally stand on Brexit?
Well, I stand genetically Remain. I mean, my parents were very, very keen. I can remember them voting in the first referendum to join the common market. And due to their wartime experiences, they had met a lot of people from Europe in one way or another. My father particularly had friends across France, Italy, various countries, so I was brought up speaking French at the breakfast table, or not getting any breakfast, and I was brought up with an enthusiasm for Europe, and I had exchange visits in France and places like that, and always felt very much a European citizen, and I thought that would stay that way, and was very shocked when the Liberal Democrats, in fact, started calling for a referendum in 2008. Nick Clegg and Joe Swinson were calling then for a referendum, and horrified by the way that David Cameron was squeezed by the Lib Dem coalition and squeezed by his right-wing members of his party into making what I personally think was a mistake to have a referendum in the first place, particularly a very badly thought through referendum. But one has to think about the consequences of that, which is that there's kind of been a psychological civil war going on ever since that referendum. And I was one of the first to speak out about hate crime in 2016 and was mocked at the council for doing so, but one could see it rising because it had unleashed a certain something. But overall now I follow my party view that you just cannot ignore so many largely well-meaning people who voted to leave. They believed in leave, and if we live in a democratic society, we have to abide by the results of elections, referenda, even sham consultations that we see thrown out now and again. We have to have a yardstick by which we make decisions.
What were your thoughts about the recent Extinction Rebellion protests?
I was very, very enthused by that, and I think they are serving many important functions. The first function is they are protecting our right to protest, and that is hugely important, whatever the cause is. I did make a supportive speech at Wycombe District Council saying they were revitalising our high streets, which caused some amusement, but they wouldn't be there if they didn't think that they were going to get some publicity, and people are noticing them there in the high streets, and I think that's the right place for them to be. In terms of Extinction Rebellion, I was pleased to support them at the County Council when we took a vote on climate change issues, emergency motion we had about 2030 or 2050. I abstained on the motion because although it had some good things in it for the council to do, it was setting a 2050 date for things to be done by, and I'd already pledged to school children and other people that I would vote for 2030. And I think the trouble is that if you set a date that's a long time away, there's so much short-termism in politics, people thinking about how they're going to be elected tomorrow and stay in for 4 years and that kind of thing, that you have to set an earlier date.
What's your opinion on the grammar school policy in Buckinghamshire?
Well, the problem with our education, as with our housing provision, is it's all become fragmented. So we have private schools, we have academies, we have grammar schools, we have secondary schools, we have cooperative schools. The whole thing is fragmented now. One might call that parental choice, and that's the way it should be in society. But the impact on the 11 plus is devastating for some children. I was always expected to pass the 11 plus, and I did, and then I did really badly at Wycombe High School. I found the change from small primary school to a very large school difficult, and I kept coming bottom of the class because I had distractions like sport and so on. I couldn't concentrate very well. I was quite a hyperactive child, so I was always kind of had a stream of ideas rather than being able to focus on schoolwork. I mean, what I would say about it is the Labour government quite rightly introduced the opportunity for balloting for parents, and nobody has ever really explored that option thoroughly in Buckinghamshire. And the threshold is high for parents to end the selective education, but I do think that should be put to parents in a way that is more accessible, with a lower threshold, and let the parents decide on that. When I stood for Parliament for Labour in 2005, I did say that every school should be the standard and have the funding of a grammar school, and that was quite a universally popular approach to it, because even, I represent a deprived area, Micklefield. The parents still hope beyond hope that their children will get a grammar school place. And of course, very, very few of them do. But they hope for that. And then they hope their children will go on to university in that kind of natural pathway that follows. So I would like to see this system really put to the parents in grammar school areas, because I don't think any political party is going to grasp that nettle, because constituencies that already have the selective education would probably vote out anybody that dared to suggest abolition. In fact, it was Margaret Thatcher that actually produced more comprehensives during her tenure. Labour didn't introduce a fair ballot for parents, and that is what I would like to see.
What is your thought on the rise in the use of food banks and homelessness in the Wycombe area?
Well, I support an awful lot of people now who are bearing the brunt of the austerity cutbacks and benefit changes. Every week I am supporting people with universal credit problems that they can't claim for 5 weeks, but they can actually have an emergency payment and they can get a backdated payment. It's just that not many people know that, or have the can manage that kind of subtlety of the claiming process. Evictions are at a record high, and so is debt for families. The austerity measures have been loaded onto ordinary families who average £15,000 personal loan debt now. What really upsets me about it is the lack of advocacy for these people. You can go down to Wycombe Court any Thursday and see people being evicted. It's heartbreaking. They haven't got any advocacy. Anyone out there who knows somebody who's threatened with a possession order or eviction, or the bailiffs, should immediately get in touch with the housing provider and try and get a delay in the possession order while people get the money together. I mean, I end up having to tell people, sell your car, sell your house contents, keep that roof over your head. It was really disturbing. With the food banks, I have wondered what would happen if all the food banks went on strike tomorrow, because the food banks are propping up now charitably a basic human right of being fed, and the welfare state should be providing for that. That's why I pay taxes, because I don't want starving homeless people, and it being my responsibility through not having politically campaigned to get my tax paid in the proper place for the proper service. I think food banks are saving people's lives, because they would be starving during the 5 week of claim for universal credit otherwise, but they can barely keep up with the demand. What I would say to people out there is that the former social fund that was abolished under the coalition now has a £50 voucher scheme that you can apply for from to Bucks County Council, an emergency grant scheme, and I would try and get that as a first resort, get that £50 food voucher, because with a food bank you can't have complete choice of what you have. So when I give to a food bank, I think, well, how do I know somebody wants a tin of blackberries? How do I know that somebody, needs toilet rolls this week? I mean, it's very... it is not a civilised society that has to force people in that situation. But I say to the volunteers at the food bank, well done on what you're doing, and please make representations wherever you can that your service shouldn't be necessary.
How do you feel about the NHS as an organisation?
Well, I still believe that the NHS is the pride and joy of Britain, the UK, without any doubt whatsoever. I've been very lucky to work within the NHS for well over 20 years, I would say, and there was a tremendous team spirit and pride and dedication among NHS workers. They are fantastic in their ethos, their outlook and their skills, and every party I know at this election is doing something to a greater or lesser degree to try and protect and improve the NHS. I mean, if you want to focus me down, I think that promising to build additional hospitals is an absolutely empty pledge, because they will be empty, because we haven't systematically been training enough doctors and nurses and all the allied staff, radiographers, occupational therapists, all of those staff. There needs to be continual training to get it up to the right numbers. And we are already short-staffed, so where are new hospitals going to be staffed from? The other thing I feel very strongly is the duplicity of saying people will be bringing A&E back to High Wycombe, because A&E was transferred from Wycombe to Stoke Mandeville in 2005 under the Labour Centres for Excellence programme. And that was very difficult for me. I was Labour parliamentary candidate during all that time that was going on, and I campaigned against her. But Labour were advised by the medical associations that you needed a 500,000 population to serve an A&E, because you wouldn't get the critical mass of staff from consultants and nurses otherwise. And they argued there would be better outcomes. And in the end, everybody needs a better outcome in the NHS. So if I was elected on December the 12th, I would ask for a review, a UK-wide review of the 96 A&Es that have been closed, because we need to look at outcomes, we need to look at accessibility, and we need to look at the impact on the ambulance services who have been really dumped with this problem, that if you have to travel further to an A&E, you're relying very heavily on the paramedics. And like everybody else, I see them bumping round the pothole-strewn roads of Buckinghamshire, trying to get people in an emergency to Stoke Mandeville and Wrexham. And they could do so much more if they didn't have to make those journeys. So yes, I would love to see an A&E back in Wycombe, but that is not straightforward. I mean, I actually put my hand in my pocket and funded a legal aid case to take a judicial review about A&E moving in 2006. But the legal aid case was not supported, so I couldn't take the judicial review. So I haven't stood on a platform of bringing back A&E, because I don't think it's possible without taking into account the 98 other A&Es in the country that have been closed.
What do you feel that the role of an MP is?
Well, I think that is a very good question because it's not a well understood role. There are two basic roles. One is to represent your constituency and provide an office for constituents and help with casework and different matters and be seen at local events and support local causes. The other one is very much sitting on the green benches in Westminster and voting on very important legislation, being on select committees and playing a full role in the parliamentary democracy. So it is a split role, so both roles demand quite a lot of time. I think the reason I would get any support, if I hope that I do, is because people know I would be an absolutely excellent constituency MP. I would have a right-in-your-face constituency office in the centre of town, trying to reinvigorate our high street. I would have a team of people working continuously and in a dedicated way on the issues that Wycombe people face, and from learning what they are presenting, then it would make it easier to then know what to support in Parliament. But generally in Parliament I would support any measures that alleviate poverty, homelessness and that kind of thing, because I believe that we have had a very good welfare state, but it must deal with people's basic needs first.
Final question. I would assume, having heard what you've just said, that you would continue to live in Wycombe and that you wouldn't seek a second home nearer Westminster if you were elected.
No, I would hate to have the responsibility of living in London. We have an excellent railway service between High Wycombe and London, and I do enjoy that journey. It gives one an opportunity to think through things, and I can't imagine a situation where I would be winkled out of Wycombe district.
That was Julia Wassell, who is standing for the Wycombe Independents in the Wycombe constituency at the general election. You can hear that again along with my other interviews with the candidates standing in Wycombe and at Beaconsfield at the general election, as well as the two roundtable discussion programmes we recorded with the candidates on our website, which is wycombesound.org.uk. Coming up next, we'll be hearing from the Wycombe Labour Party candidate, Khalil Ahmed.